Okay, all set, Councillor.
Thank you. Welcome to the Audit and Risk Committee. I have some introductory remarks to read out, as it's a remote meeting. This is the meeting of a council which is being held remotely. The meeting is being recorded and streamed via YouTube, where members of the public are able to watch the meeting. Please note that any comments posted on the chat feed of the council's YouTube page during the recording of this meeting will not be monitored by the council. The recording will be available on the council's website following the meeting. All members will have been provided with remote committee guidance note prior to the meeting. And points include all mobile devices should be switched off or set to silent so that the meeting is not interrupted by ringtones. Please switch your profile to mute unless you are speaking. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand in order that I am aware you wish to speak. For each item, officers will present the report and the committee will discuss it. So having said that, just maximise my window again. There we go. I move to agenda item 1, which is apologies for absence. Apologies for absence, please.
Yes, we have Councillor Morris substituting for Councillor Mackenzie, Chairman.
Okay, welcome Councillor Morris, thank you. And also welcome to Councillor Dadds. Now moving to item number 2, declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest from any members, please?
None for me.
No, that's a general no from all of us, thank you. The minutes of the previous meeting, item number 3. I'd like to ask for a vote on the confirmation of the meetings for those that are in attendance. Yes, myself, Councillor MacDonald and Councillor Kettle from the available committee members. I'll start off the voting by voting in favour of the minutes. Councillor MacDonald.
In favour.
And Councillor Kettle.
In favour.
I've got an option for abstaining to Councillor Morris.
Yes, I'll abstain.
Councillor Dadds.
I will exercise my right to abstain.
Thank you. Okay. Moving on to the next item, which is item 4, the counter fraud policy, which begins on pages 9 to 52. And I'll hand over to the officer to present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The report provides members with an opportunity to consider and comment on the revised counter fraud policy and associated strategy. The policy requires approval by members, whereas the strategy and response plan are for noting only. It's important to periodically review policies and procedures that have been put in place to manage the risk of fraud to ensure they remain current, relevant and appropriate to the organisation's needs. The existing counter fraud policy and associated strategy are now 3 years old. Although during this time there's been no changes in legislation as far as fraud is concerned, both are in need of a refresh. Good fraud risk management begins with good governance and the right culture. Therefore, the purpose of the anti-fraud policy or counter-fraud policy is to set out the organisation's stance on fraud and the responsibilities for its prevention and detection. Fraud is now officially the most common crime in the UK. This means that for many organisations, it is now a case of when will we become a victim rather than if. Many frauds are quite simple and succeed because people have either been too trusting and have not questioned what they've been asked to do, or have unintentionally or intentionally circumvented lax or non-existent internal controls. Fraud can both damage the financial health of an organisation as well as its image and reputation. This is why managing the risk of fraud makes good business sense. Planning for fraud and taking steps to reduce its likelihood and impact can be a much more cost-effective approach than dealing with the consequences of inaction later. The strategy includes an action plan setting out what we are going to do to mitigate the risk of fraud, and our commitment to a zero tolerance approach. The policy itself has a short statement about the organisation's commitment to prevent, detect and investigate fraud and take action against fraudsters. It also the policy applies and to everyone and sets out the expected behaviour of staff. The strategy and fraud response plan deal with what is fraud, what it might look like in the context of the organisation, the responsibilities of both senior management and staff for preventing, detecting and reporting fraud, and how and to who to report suspicions. I'm quite happy to take any comments in relation to all the documents provided.
Okay, thank you for that report. And now opening it up to comments and questions. I've got Councillor Morris. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of points. I mean, I think obviously we need a fraud policy. We need to clamp down on anything that is going amiss. Could you tell me, in part of that, it says that when there's fraud within the council, that a response, or there will be commissioning of an investigation. Well, what I'd like to know is who is actually going to be responsible for commissioning that investigation. And also, later on, you're talking about the housing revenue account, where you've got a memorandum of understanding with Swan. And I wondered if we had a memorandum of understanding for the main account with any neighbouring council, perhaps.
Thank you. In terms of investigations, we have a counter-fraud team, and the counter-fraud team actually receives suspicions of fraud. It's then based on the evidence we obtain whether we commission or proceed with an investigation. So we look at the merits of each case and then decide whether it's worthy of investigation, whether it's in the public interest to continue with the investigation. So it essentially falls to the counter-fraud team to decide whether an investigation proceeds or not. In relation to Swan Housing, we started a pilot exercise with Swan Housing, and we're now moving into a formal contract or a memorandum of understanding. At present, we don't have any other partnerships ongoing in relation to fraud. Well, I say that, I'm also the Chief Audit Executive for Rochford District Council, and I do oversee fraud at Rochford Council.
Thank you. Councillor Morris, you want to come back on that? Thank you.
Okay, so basically I'm taking it from that you're the person that would commission the investigation. Can I also
Sorry.
Can I also ask, if it's not exactly fraud, but if there is misappropriation of funds, would that be something that you would need to consider, and maybe have we got somewhere within the fraud policy to deal with that particular aspect? It's perhaps not as, it may not be as serious as actual fraud, but misappropriation of funds is still taking money out of the pot that should be there for the use of the public.
Yes, when we talk about fraud, we also considered bribery and theft. So basically, if you talk about misappropriation, if it's warranted theft, we would look at it. And also, we also look at staff conduct. So it depends on whether if it relates to a member of staff, we would obviously look at it. But yeah, we would look at misappropriation of funds, and it's considered under theft or fraud, or perhaps even bribery. So we do look at that. So we would look at misappropriation of funds in the context of probably staff conduct.
Councillor Morris.
Last one, I promise, Alan.
Yeah.
So basically, you would look at misappropriation of funds dependent on the size of the problem, presumably, as to how serious you take it.
Yeah, each case is looked at its own merits, but if it's in relation to staff, it's not about the size of the money misappropriated. It's misconduct, or could be considered gross misconduct. So, I mean, in terms of prosecuting or taking a case to court, that we will probably look at some of the money involved then. But in terms of an internal staff disciplinary hearing in relation to theft, the size of the value is immaterial.
Okay, Paula, did you want to come in? No, okay, thank you. Councillor Dadds.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And is that how we do? Just show our hands that way?
Yes, please, yeah.
Right. To the manager, the officer, you say that it's the most common crime, and that obviously we as an organisation have to do what we can to reduce those risks and the cost associated with fraud, theft, misappropriation. Can you tell me what is our current risk? What is the value of the crime that's been committed to the council in the last 12 months? How many cases did we have open, investigated? How many are closed? How many are ongoing? Because I want to try to understand the relevance of this policy. If it's a policy that's just going to sit on the shelf and we have no current cases, we've not investigated any cases, we've had none reported, what is the reality of this document and its use? So what I'm trying to get to, Mr. Chairman, is that, how many cases did we have last year? What is the estimated value and exposure to the council and its risk? How we're managing that risk?
Thank you, Councillor. I'm trying to remember the facts and figures put into my annual report that went to committee in June, but for last year, for 2019-20, we received in excess of 750 fraud referrals. I think the majority of those were closed down. We did report savings to the council, or non-cashable savings to council, of £1.3 million, and also a further £130,000 in cashable savings. In terms of non-cashable savings, we have to apply figures to, say, return of a council property. So basically, it's saving us money from putting an individual into temporary accommodation. So based on Audit Commission guidance, we calculate a figure, an arbitrary figure for non-cashable savings in relation to obtaining a council property back. Also, when we stop right to buy applications as well, which we may deem to be fraudulent, we look at the value of discount applied for and then use that as a saving figure. In addition to those, I mean, I talk about we've got council properties back, so we then can reallocate those. I think last year we returned something like 9 properties to the council. And in addition to that, there are a number of ongoing internal investigations. So in terms of a fraud policy, I think such is required because the level of fraud is quite high. It's not something you can stop. Fraud will always be ongoing and always be those individuals out there who want to perpetrate fraud. So to have a counter fraud team and a policy which sets out a zero tolerance stance is quite crucial to me.
Paula?
Sorry, I'm having technical issues today. I've just got the annual report that Mike presented back at our meeting in June that set out the number of cases. So during 1920, the counter fraud team received a total of 771 referrals. And as a result of that work, it resulted in £161,000 of cashable savings. So that's where that will be council tax relief that's been given when it hasn't been, when it shouldn't have been, those kind of things. And their non-cashable savings of around £1.3 million. And that relates to stopping right to buys. So that's stopping people from the removal of housing stock from our estate, and it also meant 7 rented properties came back to the council for that could then be reallocated to people. What we do have, Councillor, is we have a corporate risk around counter fraud, which underneath that there are a number of sub risks around particular areas of fraud. The most likely areas of fraud for us as an authority is around any grants that we award in terms of inappropriate applications, around succession of tenancies, renting out your council house, that kind of thing. And then there's the normal cash type frauds where you would have potential of theft and stealing of monies, and obviously procurement is obviously a high area. We don't have a value of how much fraud we think is in the organisation. We haven't calculated that. There are a number of different kind of expectations, or not expectations is not the right word, but there are a number of different views that you can put on the various different risks to identify what you think the risk actually is. But we'd be more than happy to bring the risk profile for fraud to the working group, if the working group would like to have a look at that in a bit more detail, because I don't have that detail in front of me. Is that?
Thank you. Councillor Allen, can I come back, please?
Excuse my muting and unmuting, but yes, of course.
Thank you. I didn't get a complete satisfactory answer. Perhaps if I can just explain and just clarify. I do thank the officers for the answers so far to try to ascertain the relevance of this policy. In relation to the risks, I understand that there are a number of risks to the public, and you've identified those, and I highlighted those regarding succession, grants, council tax, claims. So I understand that. What I want to understand is that, for example, I did write down employee, staff, how many cases are there? You said there are some internal investigations at the moment. So how many were last year? Procurement, I've made a note that obviously there's always a risk around procurement. Yeah. And if nothing else, it'll be good to know whether there were any cases last year, and whether what the value of this policy is to that, because it gives public confidence that we investigate procurement allegations of inappropriateness on procurement and the outcomes of those cases, and whether there's any theft in the organisation. So it's just looking at those risks. I did make a note on the point of grants, because there has been quite a lot of government guidance around fraud and going back and doing audit and risk auditing of the current hospitality grants, small business grants, and the grants relating to COVID-19, because obviously a lot of money was given out to local government to then distribute in a quite quick fashion, which no criticism given the urgency. But I know that there's a number of documents out at the moment which talks about now sampling those applications and going back to double check that the public are not at risk, or have not been at risk of fraud. But I certainly would like to know, Councillor Davies, if we can, is to understand how many cases there are in relation to staff and management, or whatever it may be, in the last year, how many are ongoing, how many are closed, and just understand that risk in relation to this policy.
Okay, in relation to staff, and Mike, you can correct me if I'm wrong, we have not had any allegations of fraud by members of staff. So there has been no investigations of allegations of fraud by staff in the last year. The investigations into staff are more around conduct matters, and that's more around behaviour rather than fraud. So when Mike kind of talks about those figures, I tend to separate those out because they're not fraud unless it's classed as fraud. The majority of them are around non-compliance with council procedures, but they're not fraud in terms of misappropriating funds. We haven't had any procurement. We have not had any allegations regarding procurement fraud to investigate. So that's positive. And just because we haven't had any doesn't mean that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Because actually it shows that we've got very robust procedures in place up front to ensure that things are being done in the right way in the right time before, rather than having to deal with it after the event. In relation to the grant monies that you've talked about, the council put in place some very stringent procedures actually for awarding grants monies, where a number of authorities actually have put post checks in after awarding grants. We've actually did quite a lot of pre-checking beforehand to weed out potential fraudulent claims. Subsequent to that, we have done a data matching exercise, which Mike can talk a bit more about if need be, where that has then matched the claims that we have paid with various government databases and various other authorities to make sure there's been no duplication of claiming. And we actually have only got 6 cases that we are out of, I think, I can't remember how many, Mike, we've paid out, but only 6 cases that require detailed investigation. During the process of awarding those grants as well, we actually transferred 2 of our counter fraud officers over to assist and help review the evidence to make sure that grants are being paid correctly, which was a really positive thing. So yeah, so I don't, Mike, I don't know if there's anything else you want to elaborate on there.
Yeah, in relation to the internal investigations, you're right in what you say, Paula, that most of them in relation to staff conduct. The only one I think we looked at last year was possible fraud was a housing application, which we then stopped and we pulled that application. So there's no staff related fraud or theft or misappropriation of funds. In relation to the business grants that we paid out, we've paid out over 2,500 payments. We've now completed 3 data matching exercises. So we've basically tested the whole population. We've not dipped sample, so we completed a whole testing of the whole population. The first data matching exercises identified 6 potential irregular payments, and they're being further investigated. Our second matching exercise identified a further 2 possible irregular payments. And the last one I submitted only last night, the results come back, there are no irregular payments identified from that. So in total, when we're paid out over 2,500 payments, there's 8 cases that require further investigation by the counter fraud team.
So thank you, Councillor
Thank
Davis.
you.
I know that duplicated some of your information received in June. So as a new member, I hope you allowed that latitude for that.
Yeah.
Thank you very
That's
much.
all good. Okay, so there's no more further comments. I just want to thank the officers involved for the report. I'll move to the recommendation, which is on page 9, that the committee approves the counter fraud policy and notes the counter fraud strategy and fraud response plan. Okay, I'll start with myself. I vote in favour. Councillor MacDonald. Sorry, Councillor Morris, have you got a request?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask whether we could change the review period. It's currently for 2023. Can we change it till 2022? The reason for that being that NFI data is downloaded every 2 years, so it will be in line with that. And also it will put it in line with the period of the current corporate plan, sorry. So I'm suggesting we change the date, bring it forward a year.
Right. Okay. Officer response, please.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean,
No, Mike, no, sorry.
the time is something else you want to say, right? Okay, sorry.
Yeah, no, sorry. The council has a policy framework that it abides by, and policies are reviewed every 3 years. So we wouldn't want to bring that forward. The council's policy on counter fraud has not changed over the last 10 years. We have had a 0 tolerance to fraud, and that is our policy statement. I can't see that that would change, but should there be any major change in administration where they'd like to take a different policy stance, we have always got the option to bring a policy review forward. But our policy review arrangements for the council for all policies is every 3 years. So we would be moving away from that.
I was referring,
Thank you.
suggesting on the one occasion. I wasn't suggesting it shouldn't necessarily continue to be 3 years after that, just to put it in line with everything else to start with. But if it can't be done,
Yeah, I think we got the response. I'd like to continue with the vote, as I stated. So, Councillor Davis, myself, I vote in favour. Councillor MacDonald,
In favour.
Councillor Kettle,
In favour.
Councillor Dads,
Favour.
Councillor Morris.
in favour.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
That concludes the item. Now you now move on to item number 5, which is the external reports audit 2019-20 AFR and formal approval of the annual financial report. You also have a supplementary agenda for this in paperwork. I'd like to welcome BDO, Mr. Eagles and Mr. Ross, but I will first be handing over to Tony Foucher, our finance manager, to present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. This report concerns the preparation of the annual financial report and the audit report following the preparation of the accounts for the financial year 2019-20. The report starts on page 53 and goes through to page 177. Enclosure 3 of the report is the draft audit completion report, and that's provided in the supplementary agenda. The accounts are initially prepared on a single entity basis, reflecting the council's finances as a standalone body. At group level, they also include the finances of Sempre Homes Limited, and for the first time this year for Acorn House. And this is reflected in the accounts by additional columns in the main statements and in the relevant notes throughout the accounts. The accounts themselves are prepared in accordance with all statutory requirements, and in the main for this purpose, this is SITFA's Code of Practice on Local Government Accounting, which we refer to as the Code. The auditors, as part of their work, will ensure that the accounts comply with the Code in full. The accounts themselves are a factual document in that they reflect the council's income and expenditure during the financial year and the financial position at the end of it. The information disclosed in the accounts is governed by the requirements of the code. We do have some flexibility around some of the information that we disclose, but we have to be mindful of the public interest requirements when we exercise that flexibility. Under the regulations which were amended for this financial year, the draft accounts need to be signed by the Section 151 officer before the 31st of August, and the council needs to publish audited accounts by the 30th of November. In terms of how we performed against this requirement, the draft accounts were signed on the 12th of June, well before the requirement of the 31st of August. And at this stage, the external audit had already commenced. In terms of changes to the document you have in the report pack, we need to do a small amount of work on the narrative report and add a bit more around the risk section. We also need to have a look at the an update note 6, events after the balance sheet date, at the point where we agree a date for signing of the accounts. And that's to fully reflect the known impact of COVID-19 at that point in time. From a financial perspective, I do not expect this to be significantly different to the information that was provided to Policy and Resources Committee on the 22nd of July as part of the medium-term financial strategy report. Members will probably not be surprised to hear that the preparation of the accounts has been a bit more challenging this year, with most of the work having taken place during lockdown. The other challenge really was the introduction of Acorn House, the council's second subsidiary company. So as well as incorporating Acorn House into the accounts as we did last year, we had a second subsidiary company to include as well this year. The entire audit has also happened remotely, which has required flexibility from both BDO and from ourselves. The public inspection period for the accounts ran from the 17th of June through to the 28th of July and did not result in any additional queries. I'd like to hand over, if I can, to Ross and David from BDO to present their audit report, which, as I said before, is enclosure free, which is part of the supplementary agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to do a very brief introduction to the report before Ross runs you through the detail. I think it's worth reiterating the point that the council has done very well to have produced the accounts in the current circumstances as early as you have done. It's literally only sort of a couple of weeks after the equivalent position last year, which I think is a notable achievement. And as we said, the whole audit has been undertaken remotely with support from officers on a remote basis. So it's been quite challenging in that respect, but I think it's gone pretty well, all things considered. So we are coming towards the end of the audit. We're not quite there yet, and Ross will talk you through the final items that we need to run through. But I just want to say at this stage, well done in terms of getting things done as early as you have done, and thank you again for the support and the flexibility that we've had from officers throughout the course of the audit. So I'll pass across to Ross to run you through the detail. Again, if there's any questions that come up, please feel free to ask those as we go through if you wish to clarify as part of the presentation.
Yeah, good evening. I'll take the report as read, and I'll talk through parts of the report to navigate the committee to key messages, including updates since the report was drafted, and I'll invite questions after. So the page number, I will refer to page numbers, and there'll be the page numbers on the audit completion report itself rather than the report pack supplement. If we start on page 5, within the executive summary, just wanted to highlight a change in the materiality level that was
Mr. Chairman, sorry, Mr. Chairman, can I interrupt? There's a point.
Yep, sure. Yep.
Sorry, Mr. Sir. Mr. Chairman, I want to. Can we be referred to the agenda pages, because that's what I've got, and referring to other pages is. I want to know so I can follow.
The supplementary agenda is 2 pages short of the actual agenda page. So, you know, what would be page 5 of the report is page 3 of the report is page 5 of the agenda.
I can refer to the supplementary.
There are page numbers on the report itself.
Okay. Well, if you can refer to the ones that members have, that would be fantastic.
Well, can I tell that I can clarify what I have? I have the enclosure number 2, unless there's been a change, which is the draft annual financial report. If there's anything being referred to there, my agenda starts at page 61 as the front sheet, and then page 62. Unless obviously anyone's got anything different. I mean, they're the page numbers that I've got. So that just to make sure that if you are referring to pages, that we all start and we all know where we are.
Yeah, do you have the supplementary agenda?
Yes, I
which
think
was
there's
sent out.
The agenda, which it might be the pages that Mr. Beard is referring to.
All right, well, let me just get that electronically then.
You just mind pausing a moment.
Thank you, sorry.
So I just wanted to add that the pack that I've downloaded from the website only has an agenda pack page on the cover page to our report. So I can't see any numbers other than the numbers that we have on our slides, which are in the bottom right-hand corner of the document.
Right, you carry on, and then I'll get the supplementary online, and I'll see if I can do it that way. But there's certainly the printed agenda I've got can't follow, but that's fine. I'll look online.
Yeah, it's the supplementary, councillor, that you need to be looking at.
Councillor Dads, would you like me to ping you an email across with the supplementary? Would that be easier? I can't hear, sorry. You're on mute.
Okay, so
Sorry, I'll go online. I've got it here. So thank you very much for that.
No
Office.
problem.
Thank you.
Let me know if I can help.
that's great. Okay, Mr. Beard.
It's starting on page 7 of the supplement. In the executive summary, that the materiality level applied during the audit, i.e. the amount above which we require adjustments to the financial statements to be able to issue an unqualified opinion. For the group it was 3.817 million, and for the council it was 3.811 million. These were slightly lower, very marginally lower than the materiality reported in the audit plan, and that's just a reflection of the outturn gross expenditure on which the materiality level is based. The clearly trivial threshold, that is the threshold below which we wouldn't report to any issues. In the report that you've got there, it says 76,000. It is actually 100,000. I'm afraid that was an error in the report here. But the 100,000 is consistent with the audit plan that we presented previously. Okay, so I'll move forward to the risk areas and discuss how we've got on in addressing those risks. So page 13 of the supplement. The first risk there is management override of controls. Our work on journals posted to the council's ledger has now concluded, and we've got no issues to report there. And subject to the conclusion of work related to the valuation of non-current assets, which I'll come on to momentarily, our work to address the risk of management override of controls has concluded with no issues to report. So moving on to the following page, the revenue recognition risk. We've identified no reportable errors to date. There's a small amount of work ongoing regarding our review of whether grant income has been recognised in the correct period and whether receipts around the year end have been recognised in the correct period. The outstanding work is substantially complete actually, but it's just a few issues that we, not issues, sorry, there's just a few pieces of evidence that we're still working through, and we've not identified any issues to date. Okay. The next risk that we were addressing is the valuation of non-current assets. So to date, we've been able to conclude that the valuations of land and buildings and investment properties are within an expectation range, and assumptions used by the valuers are reasonable. Work's ongoing to reach conclusion on the valuation of council dwellings and to confirm that the information provided to the valuers was accurate. I'll highlight that on recommendation of the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, the valuers have all included a material valuation uncertainty declaration in their reports to the council. And this is owing to a shortage of market evidence to support valuations around the balance sheet date due to COVID-19, which the council's subsequently disclosed in its accounts. So this affects all entities with a 31st March year end. It's not just unique to the council, and certainly this uncertainty, it doesn't preclude the valuation from being reported in the council's accounts. It just means that there's less certainty around the attached to the valuation than there would be ordinarily. So we will report this as an emphasis of matter paragraph in our audit report. That doesn't modify our opinion. It just draws the matter to the attention of the users for their understanding. It's important to highlight that. Okay. So if we can move on to page 18 of the supplement, that is where we discuss the risk around the valuation of pension liabilities. So our work to address that risk is substantially complete. We've not identified any issues to report there. However, we've yet to receive the assurances that we require from the audit of the Essex County Council Pension Fund, which is required for us to be able to conclude our work. Okay. So moving on to the next risk is on page 20 of the supplement, and that's accounting related to the acquired Acorn House. It's similar status to the pension liability work in that our work is substantially complete, but we're waiting to receive the assurances that we require from the component auditor to be able to conclude our work. Okay. That addresses the risks that were identified for the audit. If we could just move on to page 22, just to confirm there that we haven't identified any audit differences that remain unadjusted to date. Okay, and that is also true of adjusted audit differences. Actually, we've not actually required any adjustments to the reported numbers as yet, and that's confirmed on page 24 of the supplement. On page 26 of the supplement, just to update you, we stated that our work on the annual governance statement wasn't yet complete. That has now completed, and we haven't got any issues to report in respect to the annual governance statement. Okay. Page 28 of the supplement, our work on use of resources. At the point of drafting, that work was ongoing. I'm now able to confirm that we have concluded that the council had proper arrangements in place for the sustainable deployment of its resources, and arrangements to make informed decisions regarding its commercial property investments. Our conclusion in respect of the two risks identified is therefore unqualified. The only other thing that I wanted to draw your attention to is on page 39 of the supplement. And that's just to update you on the outstanding matters list. So as I just mentioned, the annual governance statement work has now concluded and the use of resources work has now concluded. Our work in respect of the other outstanding matters remains outstanding at present. Okay. So it's at that point I'll open up to any questions that any of the members have.
Thank you, Sophia, that's most helpful. Any comments, Councillor Dadds? I saw your hand go up, I believe. Thank you.
Yes, I've got, I have a couple of questions around the ongoing audit. I did have a question regarding furlough. It doesn't necessarily need to be answered today, but just raise it because obviously it will be later reported on the COVID-19 implications. But if I deal with the audit question that I had, prior to me sitting on this committee, I was on the Housing and Communities Committee, and I raised a number of questions around grants being made to external organisations. So I'm not going to make reference to any particular organisation because that wouldn't be appropriate, but I am concerned around the transparency and the risk regarding grants to organisations. And in fact, Councillor Allen, you may be aware that I asked back in, I think it was June or July, for the auditor's details. But thankfully, I've been put onto the committee, so I can just raise it now and it can maybe be looked at. But what happened and what is happening is that members have an allocation of funds to award grants, but it would appear, looking at the, if I just I've moved off of it. If you just bear with me 1 minute. I did find the email from the monitoring officer. There was a question raised, and a number of questions have been raised about grants and whether there's any criteria around grants being made to organisations. And so in an email exchange, and this was on the 28th of April this year by Paul Birkinshaw, there was no criteria in relation to the grant. So in other words, we've been paying out grants. So for example, Councillor Smith awarded a sum of money around about £2,500 to a number of pensioner groups. And when I asked about the criteria around the risk and audit, there was none. Basically, it was just a member decision to award certain clubs £2,500 to have as a grant. Now, what I'm saying is that when we are doing our audit, and you're doing our audit to make sure we have the proper controls and mechanisms in place around grants, I've recognised that there is perhaps a weakness there, because the officer said there was no criteria on which small amounts of money are awarded by certain committees. Now, I believe there ought to be criteria around granting money to external organisations and group, and that there should be, if we are awarding monies, then there should be a set criteria, should be audit and risk, and that also, and I'm sure Councillor Allen will agree with me, that if we do have monies available to award, then it should be open to all organisations to apply, to set out what their project is, why they would like the council to council taxpayer to fund and assist, and that we should have an understanding of the outcomes of giving that money in advance, so that it's a set criteria. That has not been happening with grants in the last year. So there is substantial hundreds of thousands of pounds, I believe, the council money, capital tax money, being awarded on grants without criteria being set. Not even an application being made, so it's not even been asked for. We're giving it. So I would ask on your programme, if it's not already, that that we take a look and to make sure there is we are giving out those funds in accordance with our criteria and what is the risk. Because what we can't have, and we mustn't have, and I'm sure Councillor Davies will agree with me, we can't have any political party or group or independent group councillors awarding money to groups or organisations which they favour, and without set criteria. You know, we don't want a Westminster situation, the right to buy, where, you know, we're in effect getting into misappropriation of council tax funds to prop up certain groups or organisations that may carry favour with us going forward in voting. So I bring that out as an issue that we ought to look at. And as I say, if the auditor wants to seek clarification from me, I'm happy to send the emails that I shared and we've been shared. Now, the next question that I have, or next point that I have, is around the furlough. I'm quite furloughed payments and scheme. I'm quite aware that the public sector were not at first entitled or qualified to have access to the scheme, but the rules did change for public bodies during the transition. I'd like to know, and perhaps not now, but when we later report, whether the local, us as a local authority, took advantage of that scheme, because obviously we did and must have had staff who were at home that were not redeployed, that couldn't work from home. Obviously those, like for example, we've got certain leisure, would have certain operational duties that we didn't have to carry out, and it would have been unlawful to carry out because it wasn't essential and you couldn't do it from home. So therefore those salaries and wages and payments could have and ought to have been paid by the public grant or the grant funded by government. If we haven't, have we missed an opportunity there to reduce the liability on the council taxpayer for Basildon. And I think it is really important. If we've just sat back and not applied for a grant which we're entitled to, that is not us being financially well managed. And we miss out on hundreds of thousands of pounds each month of reducing our payroll, which is we're one of the highest employers in the borough. Millions of pounds being spent on salaries and wages. If we did have the access and the right, have we exercised that? And if we haven't, what is the cost to the taxpayer for not doing so? So those are my 2 points that I raise.
Thank you, Councillor. I'd like to bring in Paula, please. Thank you, Paula.
Sorry, using iPad and my arms are all over the place. If I can take the furlough issue first, Councillor, I was aware that you might have raised this particular point. So I have spoken with our head of HR to get an understanding as to whether or not we use the scheme. And I have a response as follows, which I will read. And obviously, if you've got follow-up questions, then I'll have to take those away. As an organisation, we exhausted all options prior to considering furloughing staff. And we are largely very successful in ensuring that the majority of staff were either able to function as usual, albeit remotely, or where this was not possible, we actually redeployed them into suitable alternative work. There was a very small percentage of staff that reside within our public space directorate, and specifically leisure operations, that were initially unable to be redeployed for a number of weeks. And as such, they were furlonged for that period. However, we have continued to identify redeployment opportunities for all those staff. Obviously, as you can imagine, our first requirement was to make sure that we responded to the COVID situation and response promptly and quickly. And obviously members will be aware that a number of hubs were set up to respond, and staff that were taken, most of the staff were redeployed into those hubs. I have also, no, sorry, that's it. Sorry, that's all the information that I have on that at this time. And in relation to the grants matter that you've picked up, obviously I'll leave Ross and David to come in here from an external audit point of view. From an internal audit point of view, we have audited the voluntary sector grants that the voluntary grants that we award to organisations, which goes through a very robust process.
Mm-hmm.
The particular grants that you're talking about, I'm not aware of. I think these ones that are delegated to committee to just allocate. So I'm not aware of those. So I'm going to. What I'm going to do is park that, and I'll have a chat with the monitoring officer around that particular issue and what he has done in terms of looking into that, before I commission any further work on that from the internal audit's point of view. David, I don't know if you've got any comment to make on grants as part of your audit work, or whether that was underneath the materiality rates.
I think the short answer is that as we're working to a materiality level of £4 million, it would be something we wouldn't focus on, because it would not contribute towards potential misstatement of the accounts, and ultimately that is our focus. So I think it's an interesting point, but it's not something that we would look at from an external audit point of view.
Can I just come back then, Councillor Davis?
Yeah, I'd just like to also verify that we are looking at the work and accounts that concluded up until the 31st of March this year. And that's the area of focus that we should be focusing on. But yeah, back to you, Councillor Dess.
Yes. Well, I don't accept from the external auditor that because it's not material, the sums of a couple of £100,000 is small, that it's not a relevant point to raise, and it ought to be as part of any process to ensure that all funds of the public person, taxpayer Basildon, are protected. And if a matter is raised like this, that it is taken seriously and that it should be have regard to, because when you're making a statement of being well financially managed, that is part of the process. Now, it may be that the criteria is such that you're not being asked to look at that, but I raise it nevertheless. In relation to the what Paula said about the grants, yes, the organisational grants, I understand there is a policy, there is a set application process, and they're assessed and they're quite strict. I mean, I know that Parkrun applied, it got rejected, it had to then reapply. You know, they have to do a full statement of case, the outcomes and justification, and that was, I think, for about £1,500, so robust. Member and committee grants, it's running into, I sent the housing committee account, I think it was like 150,000. It's a lot. And then when you look at all the committees, we're talking hundreds of thousands of pounds. You know, to say all the pensioner clubs will receive £2,500 regardless. They've never applied for it, they've not asked for it, but they can all have £2,500 each. Good on our pensioners. We've got to look after our pensioners, Councillor Smith said. They're all receiving £2,500 to have a party, do whatever they like with it. They can spend it as they wish. Well, I'm sorry that whilst that may be well intended, that is not good process, risk analysis, transparency in us as an organisation to give out grants. It may be great that everyone can have an ease up and a party, but that is not what we're here to do. Now, if the external auditor is saying that is something which is outside of their scope, then that's fine. But if Mr. Eagles could just clarify the position, whether that is a cause of concern and whether that is something which they look at, or whether they say, no, that's internal only, Paula will look at that, and that that's not really for something that we are troubled about because it's only, you know, a few £100,000. I mean, if that's what he's saying, I'd like him just to clarify.
Okay, hold on for a moment. I've got Paula. Would you like to come in at this point, please?
So I can certainly respond to that point.
Hold on, David.
Yeah, no, let David
Sorry,
speak first. Councillor David,
okay.
please let David speak first.
Just going by order of indication. Thank you.
Sorry. No, it's okay.
Sorry, Chairman. Apologise for leaping in there. I mean, the short answer is we are required to focus our risk-based audit using materiality. So if something is below a material level, then we would not focus our attention on that. If it was a suggestion that there was inappropriate governance arrangements or inappropriate behaviour by councillors, for example, in terms of awarding grants in a particular way that was a suggestion of some systematic failure of governance, that there was sort of widespread corruption, for example, that's a different matter. But in the first instance, it would always be referred to internal audit and to the counter fraud unit to look at, to investigate. So the first point is materiality is a driver of what we do. That's why the fee levels are what they are. If we were lower the materiality and do more work, then our fees will be up to a very, very, very significant amount of money, disproportionate to the funding of the council. So we have to be driven by that. But as I said, it's not something we are disinterested in, but it would need to be something that's a more systematic issue, and to determine that would need to go through a review by internal audit and by counter fraud in the first instance.
Okay, thank you. Paul, who'd like to come in? Thank you.
Yeah, I think what I've said is I'm going to take that away, and I'm going to speak with the monitoring officer and the Section 151 officer, because I don't know what work's already been done on this area and what assurances have gone back or not in relation to this matter. And then I will come back to you, Councillor, with a response in terms of any work that we'll be doing on that. Okay?
Yes, and what I would say.
Great.
So thank you, Councillor Allen. What I would say to that is that I will write to you, Paula, with the couple of examples I have, because it does appear to me to be a failure in our corporate governance, a systematic failure insofar as committees are awarding grants to bodies which have not applied, or which are favoured by certain councillors, and that must be wrong. So I will
we'll take a look at it.
I will also copy in the district auditor, because it is something that I've already raised with the chief executive, asking for his details so I could raise it, because I think it's wrong. So, but thank you for the assurance that you'll look at that. If you could obviously liaise with me, and I can give you the examples so that you have those examples that could take to the monitoring officer and the 151 officer.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we've got positive way forwards on that. Okay, Councillor MacDonald, do you indicate? Thank you.
First of all, I'd like to commend the auditors on getting the report to us in such a timely fashion, and also to the officers involved in getting the accounts to the stage they have at this time. We've almost sort of done better than last year in some respects. But I just wondered if David or Ross could give us a little more of an indication of how, obviously, it's been very extraordinary circumstances. And whilst I understand that a lot of evidence is held digitally, I just was interested to know how having to collect evidence in that way, whether there were any challenges, anything that you couldn't do that you normally would have done during the audit process, and how you've actually got around that to ensure that you still have acquired the evidence base necessary.
So the issue that you raised there around the availability of evidence, it's not been so much of an issue for the council as it has been on other audits, where perhaps, for instance, an organisation might have stock and we're unable to go and look at stock, for instance. Whereas the council's accounts don't sort of present us with such challenges as much, because as you suggested there, that a lot of the records that we required to support transactions, for instance, they are held electronically. The only example that I can think of whereby a piece of evidence was in hard copy, so we wasn't able to get it immediately, was a DWP notification, but it was soon obtained once the officer was able to access the office. So it didn't hold up the audit in any way.
Okay. Yeah, if I can just come back. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that's remarkable, really, that you've managed to achieve that. I did note that the bits of evidence that you are still outstanding appear to be coming from outside bodies, such as Essex County Council, and I think there was something else you mentioned as well, that you were waiting, Acorn House, I think. But if I could just have, just confirmation, I'm sure I know the answer to this, but that you are happy that you've had a full level of cooperation from officers of the council, and that, the relationship has worked well, given the extra strains on current circumstances.
Yeah, we're very, very much so. So the team that report into me, who have been doing a lot of the work, they have commented on how quickly they are getting responses. There has been an officer put in place specifically to coordinate, or part of his role is specifically to coordinate our audit queries, and he's turned things around very quickly. There was a bit of a bottleneck in one of the services for some evidence that we required. But generally speaking, actually, very much the majority of our queries and requests, we have received quick turnaround.
Excellent, lovely, thank you.
Thank you. Maybe this is a question for Tony or the BDO team. Have any of the accounting policies changed at all in the period?
Councillor, for this year, we haven't actually fundamentally changed any of our accounting policies. There was no requirement to do so. We review them every year. We've made a couple of very small tweaks to them, but we didn't require a review of accounting policies at all during for 2019-20.
Thank you very much. And one for the auditors, are you satisfied that there is presently no substantial doubt about the council's ability to continue as a going concern?
Yes, we are. We're comfortable, both in terms of, well, there's two sides on this. One is the basis of preparation of the accounts, and the code which drives the financial reporting and accounting states that you must prepare them on a going concern basis. We have also looked further at the funding position of the council and cash flows to consider whether there are any uncertainties relating to that. And actually, in this respect, there is a current debate going on with the NAO chairing to, I suppose, provide more guidance to auditors of local authorities on how we should or shouldn't be considering matters. But at the moment, assuming that we carry on with the same sort of process we would have done previously, we have looked at those sort of the funding positions and cash flows, and we are comfortable that you are not required to disclose any material uncertainties. We also have to consider things from the use of resources, the financial sustainability perspective, and as Ross said earlier, we're able to provide an unqualified conclusion in respect of use of resources generally, but also specifically in terms of the sustainable financial resources position. So yes, we have looked at that.
Thank you. It's good to hear. Councillor Morris, sorry. You're still muted.
I tried.
Thank you.
I haven't got a question for the auditors. This is more to do with the narrative that goes with the main report. If you look at page 80, assets and liabilities, it's talking about the right to buy. And I'm just wondering why it was that we were actually we had to pay 1.1 million to the Treasury, because there were schemes put in place to spend this money, which you can do. If you've got a scheme in place, you can say to the Treasury, look, we've got this scheme in place, we want to spend the money on that, and they'll let you do that rather than pay it to the Treasury. Now, I know that in the past that their schemes were put in place for this, and I'm surprised that we were therefore paying money to the Treasury we didn't have to. And can I also just make one other point? If you look at page 88, you've got some sustainable, you're talking about sustainable finances on point 3, which says the expansion of the investment asset acquisition program is one of the things that is going to be happening in the future. And yet, if you go back a page to page 87, this council does not place undue reliance on investment activities as a proportion of the council budget requirement, which seems to be a contradiction in terms to me. Anyway, please, can I have some comments on those 2 points?
I think that's you, Tony, isn't it? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to come back on those two. Thank you, Councillor, for the questions. I think in terms of the payments to the Treasury on the right to buy receipts, you're absolutely right. There was some arrangements put into place for some of the sums that used to be pulled on the capital receipts from right to buys to government. We are allowed to keep a portion of it for use in replacement new affordable housing, but not all of it. So we are still required to pay over some of those sums on a quarterly basis, and it's the total of the sums that we are required to pay over that we've included in the narrative report. We do, if we hadn't participated in the 1-for-1 scheme that allows us to keep some of the additional sums that we would otherwise have to pay over, then that sum would be obviously much higher. So there is still a benefit to the council in terms of participating in that scheme, but we are still required to pay some of our receipt over, unfortunately. In terms of the investment asset acquisitions, again, we do want to, or there is a program in place that's been approved by members to take the asset acquisition program to a higher level than it currently is. What we're doing from a Treasury perspective on that is to just make sure that the council doesn't become overly reliant on commercial income, which is the point about proportionality. So I think there is scope there within that program to purchase more assets if the right opportunities come up. Those will all come to members for approval as and when, you know, they come to the council and be considered. But from a Treasury perspective and in terms of looking at it purely from a financial perspective, we do need to keep that safeguard in place. So although we are undertaking that activity, we don't want to become overly reliant. So the two things are not necessarily totally contradictory. I can understand the need to clarify that. So we might have a look at the wording of that anyway.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to express thanks on behalf of the whole committee, the work BDO and the officers, the council put into this and the ongoing work moving forward together. I'd like to move to the recommendation, which is on
page 54, Councillor.
page 54. Thank you. I'll take those on bulk. I'll start with myself. I vote in favour. Councillor MacDonald.
In favour.
Councillor Kettle.
In favour. I just couldn't get the mute button then.
That's great, no problem. Councillor Morris.
In favour.
Councillor Dadds.
In favour.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the BDO for your support there. Moving on to the next item, which is the work programme, item number 6. I hand over to Anne to present the report, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So a proposed work programme of items was identified by officers and agreed at the Audit and Risk Committee of the 27th of May 2020. Please turn to page 179 of your agenda to view this. I would ask members please to note that there has been an amendment since publication and the annual audit letter has now been pushed back from the September committee to the 18th of November committee. The members are just asked to note the work programme, but please do let me know if you have any questions or comments regarding this.
There appear to be none. So is that a vote? Oh, sorry, Councillor Dadds. Saw you there.
Sorry, no, that's fine. Sorry, I don't know where that is. You know, I raised the issue around furlough, Councillor Davis, and I know that Paula has had a response from the officer. Whilst I didn't really want to carry on further during the audit report, I do think that we should just, I wouldn't mind knowing a bit more about that, whether that is something that we can look at the work programme or just be reported back to us. But where that we are told a small amount of staff in the public spaces and leisure were furloughed, I just want to just double check that we took the opportunity to, whilst I accept all the points made about our priority, redeploying, providing the support to the community, all that I understand, but where that we have had employees and staff at home and not working, which there's no fault of their own, there's no criticism, I want to just make sure that we did take advantage of the furlough, and where we didn't, understand what that was and what value that was that we missed out on, if at all we missed out.
Oh,
yeah.
Thank you for that. The working group are looking at COVID. Wonder if it could come in under that, but Paula, I'll rely on your expertise.
Oh, I wouldn't say I was an expert. Yes, we've got the working group is actually going to be looking at the council's response to COVID and the particular risks that the council faces in relation to COVID. So I would suggest that we include that issue as part of the response to that. That working group is due to take place on the 5th of August. So we'll need to make sure that the relevant head of service is available to come along. If not, we could rearrange that one so that we can do it justice. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you. That's the only matter that I would want to raise on the work programme, Councillor Davies.
Very much, Councillor Dads. That'll be addressed in the working group. Okay, so again, is it for noting or voting? And
Noting, Chairman.
thank you. That's duly noted. Okay, with no further business, I call this meeting to a close. Thank you for your attendance.
Oh, are we all offline now, Annie?